Welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Father Peter John Cameron. We have to begin by remembering something that is terrible beyond words. On Friday, December 14th, 2012, a deranged young man from Newtown, Connecticut, murdered his sleeping mother. He then loaded his car with several guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition and drove 5 miles to Sandy Hook Elementary School. He blasted a hole through the security glass near the school's locked front door, and he set upon a bloody rampage. Within 5 minutes, he had murdered 20 first graders, 6 and 7 years old. He also murdered 6 educators. The gunman then shot himself to death. For some reason, the central meeting point after this atrocity was St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church in nearby Newtown, Connecticut. 8 of the ensuing funerals for the victims were held at St. Rose of Lima. From the years 2009 to 2014, I served as the weekend associate priest at St. Rose of Lima Church. My job was to help celebrate the Sunday Masses at the parish each week. On the morning of December 14th, 2012, a friend from Newtown called my cell phone to tell me that a shooting had taken place at the nearby Sandy Hook Elementary School. I immediately drove from Yonkers, New York, where I was living at the time, to St. Rose of Lima, and I was present at the impromptu Mass held in the church that evening, which about 2,000 people attended, including the governor of Connecticut. And now an unbelievable 6 years have gone by. In the summer of 2012, I was on a trip to Poland to give a workshop, and I asked my host while I was there if it might be possible for me to visit the Auschwitz concentration camp. He arranged the visit, and we went. It was a harrowing experience. The visit concluded with a tour of the second concentration camp that is very close by, Birkenau. That camp contains what was originally called the International Monument to the Victims of Fascism. Unveiled in 1967, it bears a plaque that, in a number of different languages, declares, "Forever, let this place be a cry of despair and a warning to humanity where the Nazis murdered about 1.5 million men, women, and children." I was stunned by this. A warning to humanity, yes. But isn't there something more than a cry of despair? If we stop there, if we stop at that, then life itself becomes impossible. We need a different kind of cry. We always need the possibility of a new beginning. We need something to start from. Some of you will recall the alarm that gripped this country between the years 1978 and 1995, when the terrorist known as the Unabomber carried out a nationwide bombing spree by way of the United States postal system, which targeted academics and technology experts. He killed 3 people and injured 23 others, including Yale University professor David Gelernter. Upon recuperating from a nearly fatal mail bombing, he wrote this: Although I was hurt permanently and will never get back a normal right hand or right eye, although my chest will always look like a gouged out construction site, here is the main thing. I recovered. In some ways, I am better than before. If you insert into this weird slot machine of modern life one evil act, 1,000 acts of kindness tumble out. Flashing back to 2010, as I stood there in the Nazi concentration camp, reading the plaque on the Birkenau Memorial, feeling pretty depressed, I looked up and I saw something that I will never forget. It was a Catholic priest who had with him a group of young people. They were all gathered around him, and the priest was getting ready to do something. He was preparing to celebrate Mass, right there in the concentration camp, in that place of unspeakable hatred and barbarity. And I thought, yes, that is the better cry. A cry for something that perceives a promise even within the most challenging circumstances of life. Today we are blessed with the great honor of having with us two exceptional women who are here to help us cry out for that something. We are honored to have with us Jennifer Hubbard. Jennifer's youngest child, Catherine Violet, was a victim of the Sandy Hook's elementary school shooting. Jennifer has established the Catherine Violet Hubbard Foundation in her daughter's memory. The foundation is currently building the Catherine Violet Hubbard Animal Sanctuary in Newtown, Connecticut. Jennifer currently serves as chair and president of the sanctuary. She is also a monthly contributor to Magnificat and the recipient of the 2014 and 2015 Catholic Press Awards. And I can attest to the fact that Jenny Hubbard is one of Magnificat's best-loved writers. 1 month after the Sandy Hook school shooting, St. Rose of Lima Church presented a series of talks for the parents of the children in the religious education program as the children were preparing to return to school for the first time since the shooting. As you can imagine, it was a tremendously anxious-ridden time. The point of the program was to help the children and the parents make the transition as easy as possible. The director of religious education for the parish, Pam, was very close to the 8 mothers from the parish who had lost children in the massacre. Those 8 mothers became very close after December 14th. And Pam mentioned to Jenny what the parish was planning to do to help the parents. Well, when Jennifer Hubbard learned that the parish was going to hold this gathering, she did something that no one ever expected. She decided on her own that she wanted to come in person and speak to the assembled parents face to face. And that is what she did. I was asked to moderate that session, and in preparation for it, I called Jenny on the phone. During our conversation, I asked her how it was ever possible for her to do something that most of the world would consider completely impossible to do. And Jenny responded by saying this: "There is a presence that is so much better than us, and we have to acknowledge it." When the day arrived, as she stood in the pulpit of St. Rose of Lima and addressed the church full of parents, what she said and the way that she said it was utterly amazing. It was, as I told her afterwards, like listening to St. Catherine of Siena speak. You will see that for yourselves shortly. And when the other mothers heard that Jenny was going to go to speak to the parents, some of them also volunteered to go and speak at the parish sessions. Today, we are also deeply honored to have with us Dawn Ford. Dawn Ford was born and raised in Danbury, Connecticut. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the State University of New York at Brockport. Early in her career, she worked in the fields of chemistry and environmental science. After the birth of her 3 children, she pursued a master's degree in teaching from Sacred Heart University. She taught second grade for 10 years at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, and for the past 5 years, Dawn has been teaching 6th grade math and science at Reed Intermediate School, also in Newtown. Dawn has been married for 33 years to Steve, and Steve is here, and she and her husband have called Newtown their home for the past 28 years. And we are also very pleased that Dawn's mother, Joyce, is here, and her sister, Kelly. We welcome you. We're so happy you're with us. If you look at the Wikipedia page about the Sandy Hook school shooting, you will read this remark. Some of those present in the school heard the initial gunshots on the school intercom system, which was being used for morning announcements. You need to know that that comment simply isn't true. Those are not the facts, and that is not how it happened. It has nothing to do with the reality of that day. And we who feel so urgently the need to discover our identity and somehow start again really need those facts because of the breathtaking way they make us feel looked at, listened to, understood, and valued. To say that the true story that Dawn is about to tell you is phenomenal and flabbergasting doesn't come close to the truth of it, but it is true. We have to begin again by remembering something awesome beyond words. And we are so grateful that Dawn is here to help us do that. Please welcome now Dawn Ford.
Thank you, Father Peter. My audience is usually kids, second graders and then 6th graders, so I'm a little nervous. So I do have notes to read from. It is from my heart, but I don't want to lose track, so I hope you'll forgive me that I have my notes. On the morning of December 14th, 2012, I had a meeting first thing, which was to begin in the conference room of our school. I walked into that meeting at 9:33 after briefing my sub of the morning math plans. There were 8 others in the room, including Dawn Hochsprung, our principal, Mary Sherlock, our school psychologist, Natalie Green, our lead teacher, a parent whose child we were meeting about, and various other support staff. No sooner had Mary opened up the meeting when we heard from the hallway 3 loud pops. Pop, 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 much louder. But didn't know what it was. Sounded to me like chairs falling, like maybe the custodians were setting up something in the cafeteria. Many of us stood from our seats, and I remember Dawn and I locked eyes. She was saying, "What was that?" as she was sweeping out of the room, followed by Natalie and Mary. As soon as they left our conference room, the hallway erupted in gunfire. We scattered to the 4 corners of the room, still not comprehending what exactly was going on. To me, I had nothing in my experience to tell me that that is what was happening. I thought it was fireworks, which also doesn't make sense. Fireworks would be going on outside. But there would be a barrage of gunfire, followed by momentary silence, followed by more gunfire. During one of the momentary silences, Natalie Hammond, not Green, Green was her maiden name, Natalie silently slipped back into the room, hopping on one foot because she had been shot up one side of her body, her leg, her foot, and her hand. And she whispered, "Dawn and Mary are down." And she laid herself down and pressed herself up against the front wall of our conference room, and she held our conference room door closed with her good hand. And the gunfire erupted again. During the next silence, someone whispered, "We have to call for help. Does anybody have a phone?" And at that time, the only cell phone in the room was in the parents' purse, and her purse was on the table, which was in direct view of the window to our conference room, so nobody dared to reach for it. But there was a phone on the wall that if I had stood, I could pick up the phone and dial, but then I would have been in direct vision of the window. So, not wanting to be that visible, I reached up and batted the phone off the hook and left the receiver dangling from the cord, and I reached up to punch the code that would get us an outside line so that I could call 911. But no sooner had I started punching in the series of numbers that the gunfire erupted again, so I retreated back to my corner and forgot about that phone, just left it dangling. And silence came again. It seemed to be longer this time. We dared to believe that whatever it was over, but we still didn't dare to emerge from the room. There was a different kind of silence in the hall, a different kind of activity. It was hushed movements, and we were hopeful that it was help. Someone said we need to pray and began reciting the Our Father. I crawled at this point from my spot in the corner to Natalie, and I just slipped my knees under her head so she could rest her head. Although she was lying on the floor, she was just holding her head up, very tense, not resting. And I replaced my hand with hers on the door. So although we thought it was maybe over, we still were protecting ourselves in our room. Another coworker came from the other corner of the room to Natalie's feet and just stroked her legs and soothed her, encouraging her to breathe. It felt like an endless amount of time as we waited, but finally a police officer gingerly opened the door, and emergency personnel took Natalie to a waiting ambulance, but they didn't want us to leave. We were told to stay put. So I think at this time they didn't know if there was one or multiple perpetrators, and they didn't want to move people who didn't require medical attention. But at this point, we did feel that it was safe to move about the room. So I grabbed the parent's purse and handed it to her, and we took turns making phone calls. And I called my husband, Steve, who worked just down the street at his shop, and I reported to him that there were multiple gunshots fired inside of our school. And our adult son, who was 22 at the time, was in the school, working in the library. Ben has autism, and I was very afraid that he would be very vocal and draw attention to himself. But I later learned from the women who work with him in the library that when they heard the gunfire, they knew to go into lockdown, and they led him to a supply room in the back of the library, and he went quietly. He quietly followed their directions. And once inside that closet, he found a bag of stuffed animals, and he pulled each one out silently and surrounded himself for comfort. Didn't say a word. Once we were able to leave the conference room, we walked past Mary and Dawn, who were lying in the hallway. And even as they took Natalie to a waiting ambulance, and Natalie said what she said, I still couldn't quite process what was happening, and I didn't understand why nobody was helping Mary and Dawn. Why are they just lying there? But I didn't realize until later that there was nothing they could do. Exiting the building, we walked over the shattered glass that was the entry to our school. We were among the first people to walk out of the building, and we were directed to go to the firehouse, which was at the end of our driveway, as that was our emergency evacuation location. But I couldn't leave. I didn't know where my second grade class was. I didn't know where my son was. And I quickly met up with my husband, Steve, in the parking lot because he was on the scene before many of the first responders. And he directed me to wait for my second grade class while he went to find Ben. So I headed back for the building, but of course I wasn't let in, and so I paced the parking lot until my second grade class came out, led by our building sub, Kathleen, who I will forever be grateful to for how she took care of my class that day. In the weeks that followed, once the investigation was complete, the staff was called together for a debriefing by the police before they were to release the final report to the public. And among the details of the investigation was the statement that the single event that saved the most lives that day was the fact that the PA system had been opened and broadcast the shooting throughout the school. Our school was a big rectangle, and we were in the front of the school, and people in the back of the school, if they hadn't heard that through the loudspeaker, they may have heard something was going on, but they may not have known. And then potentially there could have been a lot more people in the hall, kids bringing notes to the office, or even adults investigating, sounds that they had heard. But although distressing to hear, because a lot of people were distressed to hear what they heard over the loudspeaker, but it alerted them to go into lockdown. And everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do. The lieutenant in charge of the investigation added that the remarkable part about this detail was that the PA system was activated by the phone in the conference room, which was left dangling off the hook. And he claimed that this was a mystery because they investigated this thoroughly. That phone in the conference room was not wired to do. The only phone that was wired to broadcast throughout the school was in the front office, which was not attached to our conference room, which is probably why Wikipedia says that, because that's the only phone that was wired. So at this point, the staff members question, well, what are you saying? Are you saying, how could this be? Are you saying it was an act of God? And the lieutenant shrugged his shoulders and he said, I have no explanation. So, although I still can't comprehend the answer to the question, why does God allow this to happen? I feel that although he didn't or couldn't control one man's act of free will, the answer to the question, where was God that day, is that he was there. I believe he was there to lift all those souls straight to heaven. And I believe he was there for the rest of us who survived. In the aftermath, there was a huge outpouring of support from around the country and even around the world to some extent. And I just want to focus on a few examples. In thinking of the theme of the encounter, something to start from, I thought about this one example that when we left our school abruptly on December 14th, we didn't know at first that we wouldn't be together again as a school until after the first of the year. We had no closure with our students. They left us scared and traumatized that day with no plan for when we would come back. So someone thought it would be a good idea if we were able to get together with our students before school reconvened in a casual atmosphere, which was a great idea. So another second grade teacher arranged for some of our classes to gather in the meeting room of our public library. And when we got there, I was amazed at what I saw. The room was completely decorated for Christmas. There was a Christmas tree. There were crafts for the kids to do, gingerbread houses for them to make. Of course, there were books. And there was a mountain of stuffed animals that they were immediately diving in and crawling under and through like a ball pit, and everybody got to take one home. The thing that was astonishing to me about that day was that the library staff member who put the celebration together was someone I had just known as an acquaintance. I'd known her for a long time, just as an acquaintance, because she had been with the library for a long time. And this was a person who I didn't know well, but I had had some encounters with her, and I had witnessed encounters, and I had never had nor witnessed a positive interaction between her and another person ever. I was actually kind of scared of her. So I just looked at her in awe, and something in my heart changed toward her that day, because I did not have a very high opinion of her. But my opinion of her changed that day, and I thought maybe there's more to this person than I realized. Another significant example was the school that we were given. Our neighboring town of Monroe actually gave us a school. They had a middle school that they weren't using. It was empty. And they allowed us to occupy it for as long as we needed until our new school was built, which ended up being years. But this was significant because there was talk of us, we weren't going back to Sandy Hook, but there was talk of us being scattered all over town in empty retail spaces and empty office spaces. So this gift of a school gave us the opportunity to come back together as a school community and begin the healing process together. the most moving part of this was that when we arrived at the school over our winter break to set up our classrooms, we found that people were already there. Other teachers from our Newtown School District, but not only them, people from the Monroe School District, their friends and their neighbors were there making a school for our elementary school kids, decorating bulletin boards with snow scenes and gingerbread scenes and Candyland scenes. And as a teacher, I realize, how precious that time is. Seems like a long break, but it's not a long break in between, 2 holidays and visiting family and trying to get a little rest. So these people were here giving their winter holiday time, their rest and rejuvenate time, and their family time to build a school for us and our kids. And I remember walking in and encountering these people who were cheerily doing this work, not grudgingly. They were joyfully doing this work. And I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Support came in many forms besides the physical school building. It came in the form of things, gifts that were sent to us, anything you can imagine. Prayer shawls, meals, show tickets, jewelry, you just can't even imagine. There were so many things. And for the kids, toys, stuffed animals, school supplies, sporting events. And although I appreciated where the thought came from for sending these gifts and services, and that was from a place of helplessness and wanting to do something, for me, the things offered little comfort. However, in addition to the things, there were also notes and cards sent by kids, students in schools around the country and around the world, teachers, and the general public. These were short, heartfelt notes wishing thoughts of care and concern and healing. So these thoughts and prayers, whether spoken or unspoken, written or unwritten, along with the direct support from my family and friends, filled me with a sense of calm and peace, even though my heart was broken. I did not feel alone. Again, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for both the support from my family and friends and from people who I didn't know and would never meet. So, something to start from. In response to a horrific tragedy like the one that we experienced, there is an overwhelming feeling that something must be done, some kind of action must be taken. I felt this almost immediately. Well, what am I supposed to do? Why am I still here? Besides the obvious, which was to continue to live my life. I had a family to take care of. I had students to teach, friends to enjoy. But these questions have been on my mind over the past 6 years. And over these years, I've reflected on my experiences, not only being in that place on that day, but mostly what I experienced in the aftermath and how those experiences affected me. I was deeply moved by people's responses, and I continue to be moved by the good in people. I'm going to borrow words now from authors who could articulate my feelings better than I can. One author, Brant Hansen, in his book, Blessed Are the Misfits, said something so simple yet so profoundly true. He was speaking in response to the man-made tragedies in life, like what happened to us at Sandy Hook, to when people say, probably mostly the news media, when they say, we don't need prayers, we need action. Hansen says, prayer is action, and prayer changes hearts. And when one heart is changed, there's a ripple effect that we'll never know how far-reaching. Another author, Matthew Kelly, in his book entitled The Biggest Lie in the History of Christianity, says that when hearts change, people act in holy ways. And he advocates creating holy moments on a daily basis. And by holy moments, he's simply referring to acts of kindness, both big and small. I realize what I experienced and continue to experience are holy moments. I mentioned that our son Ben has autism. He's now almost 29 years old. He has four part-time jobs in our community, including his job at Sandy Hook School, which he still holds today. Although I moved on, he wanted to stay there. Ben's lucky in many ways. He has a group of friends that he's been with since elementary school. He has a busy social life, so between his job and his social activities, it gets him out in the community. He has weekly activities and monthly activities, dinners out, bowling, working out at the gym. He doesn't drive, and so he depends on people to get him to his activities. But he has all these activities because of his community. Ben likes his own company, and he likes his alone time. And if given the chance, he would spend endless hours on video games and watching YouTube videos. Without his community involvement, he would very easily slip into isolation, disconnected from people. And unfortunately, there are many people who are marginalized for a variety of reasons, whether it be developmental disabilities or mental illness, who are not quite so lucky. Ben's fortunate because he has a community of people who care about him and care to involve him. Ben and others like him often can't advocate for themselves and need others to take notice and care enough to pull them out of isolation. It doesn't even need to involve expensive buildings to be built or fancy programs to be put into place, because all of Ben's activities are organic, homegrown activities that evolved because people cared to listen to ideas and say yes to taking a chance on him and his friends. People like Dawn Hochsprung, the principal at Sandy Hook School, who hired Ben to work in the school's library. People like my mom and sister, who took over a social group for young adults with special needs that would have dissolved if they didn't. People like my husband, who employs not only Ben at his small business, but 3 or 4 other young adults with special needs. People like our town park and rec director, who allows our young adults who are all in their 20s to use our town's teen center as a place to hang out, and gather. People like my daughter, who facilitates that group and also dedicated her career to working with young adults with special needs. And people like that former town staff member who created a fun and festive gathering for our second graders. These are all holy moments. So, going back to the original questions, why am I still here? What am I supposed to do? I still struggle with these questions, but I'm beginning to wonder if that something isn't something new or big or different, but instead to continue to do the obvious, which is to live my life, taking care of my family, enjoying my friends, teaching my students. In other words, to continue to create and to recognize holy moments, both small and big. Because as Matthew Kelly says, holy moments are contagious, and creating them on a daily basis is what will change the world. Thank you.
Please welcome Jennifer Hubbard.
Given the question, something to start from, the honest truth is that at some point I keep saying, today is the day that I'm going to start to grieve. And 1 year turns into 2, and 2 into 3, and now we're at 6. And this past December marks a moment where Catherine was alive as long as she lived, or gone as long as she lived. And what I'm beginning to realize is that something to start from is really nothing. That something for me is a moment of abandonment, of expectations and what I thought would be, and a launching into the arms of God. Because that something to start from is what God wants. And in those moments of abandonment and reflection are those moments that you realize that the something to start from was put in place well before December 14th. You see, I had 2 children at the school. I had Catherine in the 1st grade. She was to the left. And I had Frederick, who was in 3rd grade. He was to the right. And what God did with Dawn allowed me to have my son. And that is a gift that I will always thank you for.
Wasn't me.
You see, God's at work in our lives. And He has something. He has something to start from because He created us. And the moment that we let go of us and let Him follow through with what He had started when He knit us together in our mother's wombs, then the amazing things about the encounters we have with Him blossom and are beautiful. You see, I started my journey with God well before December 14th. I was reunited with God through a friend of Catherine's. I grew up Catholic. I was a cradle Catholic. I knew God. I went to Mass. And somewhere along the way, I went to college, and I abandoned God, and I took control of my life. And I thought I was doing the right thing and saying the right thing and working at the right career, and I had children. And I stopped all of that. And I was reunited with God through a little devotional that I would hide in my nightstand because I didn't want my husband to think that I was some crazy lady. And so I'd read that devotional for the few minutes before Catherine would come home from school. You see, kindergarten was half day. And so in those few hours while she was at school, they were prime time. You moms know what I'm talking about. They're the golden hours. And so I'd spend a few minutes reading this devotional, and I'd walk to the bus stop, and I would ponder what I had read. And that little devotional led me to the Bible. And I started reading Scripture and wondering, what is all this? And then all of a sudden, Catherine dies. And I wrestle with the question of, but God, I was just getting to know you. And now what? And through the course of abandonment, of letting go of expectations, of realizing my perfect family in the quintessential town of Newtown, Connecticut, was not exactly how it was going to end up. We went from 4 to 3 in a blink of an eye. What I found was a God who was drawing me in because that devotional and that Bible was what was going to carry me through the darkest moments that anybody could ever imagine. We started letting go of expectations. We started letting go of what we thought was right and wrong, and we made our first big choice, which wasn't a really big choice in the scheme of things. You see, people do it every day. You march your kid down to the bus stop, and you put your child on the bus, and you send them off to school. You say, "I'll see you when you get home." But for us that day in January, it was a very real question that we didn't even realize was a question. Would we put our son on the bus and send him to school and put our trust and faith in God and what He had in store for us? Or would we take control and would we bubble wrap him? You see, we were called ahead of time and we were told, you do what you think you need to do because we don't know what to do. And so if you want your son to come into school late or early, or pick him up early, or don't send him at all, we are going to defer to you all. And it wasn't like we had this long conversation. It wasn't a Hollywood moment where the orchestra crescendos and we walk him down to the bus stop and life continues. It was a guttural reaction of, no, he must go to school and he's going on the school bus. It was as simple as that. And I truly believe that that's God. That's God planting an assurance in our souls that put him on the bus and he's mine and I will take him from there. And that's what we did. We watched him down to the bus stop and we sent him off to school. And you see, we have a rule in our house that when you make a promise, you keep a promise. And what I didn't realize in that day is when I put him on the bus, I said, I'll see you when you get home. Because the reality was he wasn't going to have a good day at school. He wasn't. And the reality was that I couldn't assure him and promise him that he'd be safe. Our world had changed like that. But I did know that I would see him at home. You see, the reality is that I will. I'll see him when he gets home from school, and I will see Catherine when I arrive in heaven. I will never understand why Catherine was taken. I had a lot of living to do with her. Man, did I have plans. But it's not for me to understand. And I'm okay with that because God's understanding is far greater. And I know that Catherine's in heaven, and I know that I will see her again. And I know that there are things that I need to do, starting with being a mom. And that started on that day of sending him back to school and teaching him trust in a heavenly Father without saying, trust God. I put him on the bus and he went to school. And we went home and we wept and we wondered what had we just done. And my husband went upstairs and he took a shower and he said, if that kid can go to school, then I'm going to go to work. And you see, in that moment, I went downstairs and I sat at my kitchen table and I opened up that little devotional. And I cracked open the Bible and I started reading because the house was really, really quiet. And someone had said to me, make sure you start journaling. Make sure you start journaling because you're not going to remember a thing about what the next months are going to hold for you. And I started writing down questions, real and honest questions. And I said to a girlfriend, if I ever die, here's where I keep my journals. Please go in the house and burn them because people are going to be angry at me. Because they were real and honest and authentic questions of what on earth do I do now? Because I have no idea. I had plans. And I had expectations. And I was going to have this perfect family in quintessential New England, and that wasn't going to happen. And so at that point, all expectations and all plans were off the table. I started writing, I started reading, and all of a sudden, Father Peter asked me if I was a writer, and I said, no, I studied art. And he said, would you write for the Magnificat? And in those mornings, I would sit at the table and I would ponder the questions of what would I write for Magnificat. And you see, in my house, if anybody reads Magnificat, you know that there's plenty of times where I talk about the moment where the sun hits the perfect part of the sky, and it pours through my window. And I believe it's God reaching down from the heavens and wrapping me in his arms and warming me on those days where I feel like I will never be warm again. And I'd wake in the middle of the night, and the questions to what I thought I was supposed to write for Magnificat would be answered, and I would write, and I would write, and I would write some more. And all of a sudden, I had a purpose. You see, Catherine loved animals. And so we decided that when we wrote her obituary, we would give donations to our local animal control center. We left out the control out of Animal Control Center, and we sent donations to this little place called the Animal Center. And it was for women, and they called us up after the fact, and they said, we received $125,000 in the course of 2 weeks. And I thought, are you kidding me? She was 6. And they came to our kitchen table, and they said, we think that what we'd like to do is create an animal sanctuary. And I said, what the heck is an animal sanctuary? You see, Catherine is the one who loved animals. And they explained what the sanctuary was, and they said it's a place where children will see their own innate beauty in the eyes of animals, and it's a place of healing, and it's a place of peace. And as they described it to me, I saw Catherine on the floor playing, and I saw her spirit delighted in where we would go from here. And so we started down this path of building this animal sanctuary. And every single moment that I say, God, what are you doing? I can't do this. You've picked the wrong person. I'm once again amazed that he would use me, of all people, to create a place where I feel that heaven and earth unite. You see, those moments where I struggle with where is God are those very days and those very moments where Scripture jumps out at me, where I'm assured that I am his daughter, that I am loved, and there's a purpose for me, that I will be protected, that I will be provided for, and that I will move forward in this life. And you see, that's where something starts. It starts in that moment of abandonment. And yes, I do believe that at some point I may say, wow, it's not a time to get started. It's already starting. And in fact, it already has. I look back over the 6 years and I'm amazed and I'm left in awe. But most importantly, I'm humbled that something so beautiful and something so miraculous as being called the daughter of God can come out of something that is so horrific.
We have 2 minutes. So, one question for each. I'm listening to His Excellency Angelo Sala. He's giving me directions. So, Dawn, my question for you is about that staff member that you were scared of.
Yeah.
Can we call her?
She's passed away.
Why do you think she did that?
Why do I think that she did that?
What she did for you?
I think that there's something about her that I didn't know. I mean, what I saw on a very surface level is that was who I thought she was. But obviously, I didn't know her. That's what I think. So, to me, I didn't see a heart in there, but that day, I saw a heart in there.
I mean, I'm just struck by the new beginning that was created through, I mean, your fear and your,
Yeah.
being repulsed by her and whatever, I mean, I have dozens of people like this in my life, but that the initiative that she took on your behalf and that you changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you changed. What changed you? Don't say cupcakes.
What changed me?
Yeah, from what she did.
Just my opinion of her. And so I think that through that lens, I recognize that people aren't always what you see on the surface. And that we're all struggling with something. I mean, and that's really what I thought about, is that maybe she's an unhappy person,
Yeah.
And maybe she is struggling with something, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't have a heart. And so I think that you just try to be more patient with people who are maybe cranky.
Yeah.
Maybe they have a good heart and they're having a bad day.
But I'm also guessing that you gave her a chance to show the world, for her to show the world her real heart.
Maybe.
I think she took a risk with you.
Maybe.
Yeah. And Jenny, I'm so struck by the courage with which you put Freddie on the bus. And I don't know, can you say more about that? I mean, where did you ever find that gumption?
I didn't. That's the amazing thing. It didn't come from me. It wasn't even a thought. I think that when you are completely at your bottom, your rock solid bottom, and you really have nothing, but you're on autopilot, is all I can think of. And I feel like that autopilot for me was God. I didn't do anything. I went with what I thought I was supposed to be doing.
But why, when you hit rock bottom, didn't you just hang out with the rocks?
I don't know. I don't know.
You have to know because, we brought you here to give us the answer to this question.
I don't know.
Do you think you're insane?
No!
I don't think so either.
I think that in every single one of us, there is this mustard seed of hope and faith that God does love us. And I think if you have that, God will work with that. And I remember praying, God, help me. And I think that's all that it takes.
Well, this is why you're such a tremendous inspiration to us. And so thank you for taking such a big risk.
Yep.
And Dawn, thank you for the gutsy way that you tell this story. You saved so many lives on that day, but I think in this room right now, you're doing that. I've heard the story before.
It wasn't me.
Well, you need to read St. Thomas Aquinas and secondary causality. Yes, it was. I've heard the story before, you know, privately sitting on your porch, and then once before on Maiden Lane, and every time I hear it, I just am so moved, and I want to love God more, and I want to do what you did in whatever way I can. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see you again.